This tiny office PC from Lenovo has already proven that with a couple of select upgrades, it's capable of delivering some serious gaming performance in popular modern PC games. In this video, I'll be putting it up against the might of the consoles. No, not those consoles. No, not those either. Maybe? No, not that far back. Yes, yep, that's the one. That's more like it. In my last video on the M75Q from Lenovo, I upgraded it from its base spec to something with a bit more grunt. The 65W PSU and single-channel RAM might have helped it fit within an office environment, but held back its Ryzen 5 3400GE APU significantly when gaming. Even upgraded with a 135W laptop PSU and a second stick of RAM, I'm still not getting the most out of the CPU and its integrated graphics, but it's a damn sight closer to meeting its potential. Pitting the M75Q against the 5th, 6th and even 7th gen consoles might not seem as much of a challenge as Warzone or Cyberpunk, but you might be surprised. Console emulation's a pretty demanding aspect of the PC gaming experience. Even consoles as old as the Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn can prove to be challenging on CPUs that lack good single-thread performance, and while emulators for later consoles leverage more of the GPU's power, they still need good CPU performance to back that up. The 3400GE then is a borderline case here. Based on both Zen Refresh and Radeon Vega architectures, the graphics performance is fantastic compared to other integrated solutions, but the CPU performance was only good for an AMD at the time. It remains to be seen if this is going to hamstring this PC's emulation performance. Sega Dreamcast emulation is a pretty flawless experience on PC all round. Although I prefer the UI of Redream, I wanted to test out upscaling a bit. In RetroArch's Flycast core, I managed to run Jet Grind Radio and Soul Calibur at full speed. Jet Grind Radio ran at a smooth 30 FPS when upscaled to 1080, whereas Soul Calibur needed dropping to 720 just to get a solid 60. The Dolphin emulator offers another superb emulation experience, though I didn't attempt to challenge it with any of its more advanced features like custom textures. Even so, Rogue Leader is one of the tougher Gamecube games to emulate, stuttering occasionally on even systems with i7 CPUs and discrete GPUs. In that regard then, I'm pretty happy with how it performed upscaled to 1080 here. Resident Evil 4 was programmed to be a 16:9 frame within a 4:3 display, and as a result I couldn't find a way to force it to fill the screen that didn't also stretch the image. Regardless, at 3x native resolution it still looks decent and plays at a solid frame rate, rarely moving from 30 FPS. PlayStation 2 emulation has always been particularly CPU intensive, and sure enough this 3400GE isn't really up to the task in some of the games tested. Lighter titles won't be an issue, as I found with Star Wars Jedi Starfighter, which runs smoothly at 60 FPS. Dead or Alive 2 dropped below 60 frequently, but that didn't have a major impact on gameplay. The first Xbox, you know, that Microsoft console with an Intel CPU and Nvidia GeForce GPU, is still ridiculously hard to emulate 2 decades after its release. CXBX Reloaded is currently the most robust emulator out there, but even with constant development, less than 20% of games are fully working. Sadly, my attempts were completely fruitless, with DOA 3 showing some signs of life, but failing to actually render the 3D elements of the game. In happier news, back to the mighty Dolphin emulator, and the tiny office PC seems well up to the challenge of running Super Mario Galaxy and Tatsunoko vs Capcom. Both ran smoothly at 60fps, even upscaled to 1080, though with the occasional stutter during shader compilation. PSP emulator, PPSSPP, runs much more smoothly on this processor than other PlayStation formats, and I had a pretty good time all round. Tekken 6 and Gran Turismo, upscaled to 3x native resolution, sit pretty much locked at 60fps. God of War, Ghost of Sparta is known to be one of the more demanding games on the system and dips below the 60fps target frequently, even without upscaling. I have to admit, I was honestly shocked how well this system runs Wii U games at 720. Mario Kart 8 won't run at a locked 60, but the engine handles variable frame rates better than most other emulated console titles, so gameplay is remarkably trouble-free. I neglected to turn off the 60fps patch in Breath of the Wild, though this again shows just how well the 3400 GE can handle it. Without the patch, this system should handle the game at native resolution and a locked 30fps with absolutely no issues. Sadly, my efforts at getting 7th gen titles to work didn't go much further than that. In testing RPCS3, The Last of Us refused to boot, and Red Dead Redemption ran at a glacial FPS before crashing. The title that did work surprisingly well was Persona 5. In fact, I didn't even realise it had been released on PS3 until recently. The frame rate's pretty solid, but the game is subject to some major visual glitches, resulting in exotic hairstyles and some 2D overlays going all Doki Doki Literature Club. My biggest issue with emulating 360 using the Xenia emulator was actually finding games I could download. After some effort, I managed to get a hold of Gears of War and Red Dead Redemption. The former seems to be having some trouble, as assets failed to load even after several minutes, a problem that was repeated on my Intel laptop with a GTX 1050. RDR, on the other hand, was dangerously close to playable, hovering some way above 13 FPS most of the time. That's 13, not 30, and didn't suffer much in the way of graphical glitches or errors. In conclusion then, this is probably not the PC to buy for emulation. The Mark II of this system runs on the later Zen 2 based APUs, which I feel might be better suited to the task. Next month I'll be trying some of these emulators out on a Ryzen 3 Pro 4350G, so make sure to click the bell if you'd like to see that video. You could argue for this as a platform for older consoles, but unless you also want the same machine to play Fortnite and Valorant, you can get equally good retro emulation from an Android box. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.